Now, because we are returning a value now, we're now a bit more independent when it comes to that total adult years variable. But there still is another external variable which we are using in calculate adult years, and that would be this age. This is still a variable which we define outside of this function and then redefine here. And again, we typically want to avoid referencing and using such external variables here. Now, in case of the result which we derived, we could solve the problem by returning. But what can we do in case of some input value which we're using? For this use case, we have a feature called function parameters. Function parameters are basically inputs we can accept in a function. And for those, we need those parentheses here directly after the function name. Here we can accept parameters and we can give those parameters any name of our choice. And we can use as many as we need. Now here I'm only interested in the age, and to avoid name duplication, even though it technically would be allowed, but to avoid confusion, I'll choose a different name here. I'll name it user age. It's like defining a variable, but without the let keyword, but following the same naming conventions as we had them for variables. So this name is up to you, but should follow those rules and conventions. This is now a parameter of this function, and inside of this function code, so between these curly braces, it acts as a variable that's only accessible inside of this function. So not outside of this function. We can't use user age here. That won't work. It's only available inside of this function. And we can now use that in our calculation instead of age. We can use user age. Now, like that, it would not work though. Instead, now that we added this parameter, when we call the function, we have to pass a value for that parameter. And maybe you're already guessing it, that's what we do between the parentheses here when we call a function. That's also what we're doing for alert already. Alert is a built-in function provided by the browser that takes a parameter actually. And we're passing in a value for that parameter here, in that case, the value which we want to output in the alert. In case of our own function, we also want such a parameter, and we want a parameter that we use in this mathematical calculation. So we want the age of the user. And therefore here, when we call calculate adult years, we can of course just pass in a value, which we create on the fly, so to say, or we use an existing variable like age here. This age variable which I create up here, I can use that down there as well and pass that value into this function when we execute this function. And here we also pass an age. And that's the great thing about functions and why they are so useful, especially if you do use parameters and return values. Now we define our general code once, but it's pretty flexible. We can call this function with different values for age, as we're doing it here. The value of age changes between these two function calls, and we'll get back different results. Our general logic, our algorithm, is always the same, but the concrete values change because we're using this parameter value here. Now, of course, you can only pass in a value for this parameter that makes sense for this function. So, for example, passing in a text like hi there doesn't make a lot of sense. Hi there minus 18, which is the operation that would be performed, doesn't lead to anything useful. But since you are the one writing your functions and you're the one calling your functions, or if you're working in a team, you are passing on the information on how this function should be used, you of course know how to call it, and that in this case, we should pass in a number, for example, the number stored in our age variable. And with all of that, if we save this and it reloads, we again get these alert boxes with 14 and 27. Now this function only needs one parameter. If we would need multiple parameters, And other functions could need multiple parameters. For example, in an upcoming exercise for you will have a function with multiple parameters. Then you can separate them with commas. So that would be another parameter here, separated by a comma. The names are always up to you, but you have to separate them with commas. Now here we don't need it, but it is something you should know because you will definitely also sometimes write functions that do need more than one parameter. And now with that, we are using all those amazing function features you should know about.